The alarms were screaming at Dallas Memorial Hospital when my phone rang at 3:47 a.m. Emergency room monitors going dark, patient records locked out, backup systems failing one by one. The night supervisor's voice cracked with panic. "Mr. Palmer, we can't access anything." The new security update broke everything. I was already reaching for my keys when the irony hit me. 3 weeks ago, I would have been racing to fix this. Tonight, I was just Gordon Palmer, 54 years old, unemployed cybersecurity architect with 26 years of experience that apparently meant nothing to Stephanie Morrison and her son Brian. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. I'm Gordon Palmer, but everyone calls me Gordy. 26 years ago, I walked into Sentinel Guard Technologies as a junior network engineer fresh out of the Army Corps of Engineers. No fancy MBA, no family connections, just a guy who understood that when you're protecting critical infrastructure, failure isn't an option. I built my career the old-fashioned way, started pulling Ethernet cables and working my way up through every level of the company. Back in the day, I'd crawl under raised floors in server rooms, trace network problems by hand, and stay up all night making sure hospital systems stayed online. While other guys were coaching Little League or taking weekend fishing trips, I was in those server rooms making sure power grids stayed secure. Cost me my marriage, cost me time with my kids, Tommy and Lisa. But I told myself it mattered. What we did kept people alive. When a dialysis machine needed to communicate with a central database, or when military communications had to stay encrypted, my work was the invisible foundation keeping everything running. Over the years, I designed the zero-point architecture that protected everything from military communications to medical devices. 42 patents with my name on them worth $1.1 billion in licensing deals. Not bad for a kid from small-town Texas who started out as a cable installer in the Army. The relationships took even longer to build. Dr. Heinrich Muller in Munich, who trusted me to secure his medical device network. Colonel Janet Foster at North Point Defense Solutions, who'd call my personal cell when classified systems needed updates. Hospital administrators from Dallas to Detroit who knew my voice meant their patients were safe. These weren't just business contacts. They were people who'd been through midnight crisis calls with me, who'd watched me solve problems nobody else could handle. Trust earned over decades, one emergency at a time. When systems failed at 2 a.m., they called Gordon Palmer, not some corporate help desk. Stephanie Morrison became CEO 2 years ago. Harvard MBA, all polish and PowerPoints. She talked a good game about digital transformation and agile methodologies, but I could tell she didn't really understand what we did. To her, cybersecurity was just another line item on the quarterly report. She'd walk through our technical briefings, checking her phone, nodding at the right moments, but never asking the hard questions. Brian showed up 8 months ago, Stephanie's son, 28 years old, fresh from some startup that got bought out before it launched. Kid had never run a real security operation, never been woken up at 3 a.m. because a power grid was under attack, never had to explain to a hospital administrator why their patient monitoring systems were down. But he was family. That apparently counted for more than experience. I tried to mentor him, really tried. Showed him our protocols, explained why we did things certain ways, walked him through the legacy systems that kept America's infrastructure running. But Brian wasn't interested in learning. He was interested in disrupting. Every conversation turned into a lecture about blockchain solutions and AI-driven paradigms. The boy could talk for an hour about revolutionary approaches without understanding why we verified every security update 3 times, or why our authentication protocols required personal verification for critical systems. "Gordy, you're thinking old school," he'd say. "We need to embrace disruptive technologies." Kid had no idea that old school meant understanding that when you're protecting a hospital's patient records, there's no such thing as acceptable downtime. The writing was on the wall when Stephanie announced a strategic restructuring last month. "We need to appeal to younger clients," she said during the all-hands meeting. "Our approach feels outdated. We need fresh energy to compete in the modern marketplace." Outdated. 26 years of keeping America's critical systems secure, and it was outdated. The end came on a Tuesday morning. Conference Room B, the one with windows overlooking downtown Austin. Stephanie slid the termination papers across that polished table while Brian sat there grinning like he'd won the lottery, already wearing the security badge that used to hang around my neck. "We appreciate everything you've done, Gordy," Stephanie said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But we need fresh energy. Brian here represents the future of cybersecurity." Brian leaned back in his chair, checking his phone while my career got flushed down the drain. 26 years of building something that mattered, and this kid was scrolling through social media during my termination meeting. 26 years, I said quietly. That's a long time to build something. Stephanie's expression didn't change. Times change. We have to adapt or get left behind. I thought about the text I'd sent Tommy 3 days earlier. Can't make it to your kid's soccer game, son. Critical system rollout this weekend. He'd replied, It's okay, Dad. I understand. I'd canceled family time to patch vulnerabilities that saved this company millions. Now here I was getting discarded like yesterday's newspaper, replaced by a kid who thought cybersecurity was about buzzwords and disruption. Sign the papers, Gordy, Stephanie said. HR will handle the transition smoothly. I picked up the pen, hand steady as a rock. Stephanie probably thought she was watching a defeated man, but she had no idea what she'd just triggered. See, buried deep in those patent licensing agreements was a clause I'd insisted on during the 2019 security crisis. If the original architect gets terminated without cause, all operational rights revert back to me. The board had signed it eagerly back then, desperate to keep me from jumping to a competitor. They never thought they'd actually need to honor it. I signed my name with the same precision I'd used to design their security protocols. No drama, no speeches, just a signature that would cost them everything. Good luck, I told Brian as I stood up. You're going to need it. I walked out of that building carrying nothing but a cardboard box and 26 years of relationships they'd never be able to replace. The security guard at the front desk, Jimmy Rodriguez, had worked there almost as long as me. He just shook his head as I handed over my badge. This ain't right, Mr. Palmer, he said quietly. Everybody knows it. The first crack appeared 48 hours after my termination. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and scrolling through job postings when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez, a project manager I'd worked with for 10 years. Gordy, something weird is happening. Munich just froze the medical device contract. They're asking for you specifically. I set down my coffee and called Dr. Mueller directly. His accent was thick when he answered, voice strained. Gordon, thank God. We received authorization requests from someone named Brian Morrison, but our protocols require your personal verification. The contract is very specific about this. I'm no longer with Sentinel Guard, Heinrich. Long pause. Then we have a problem. Without your authentication, we cannot proceed with the security updates. Our entire network remains vulnerable. Here's what these MBA types never understand. When you're securing critical systems, trust isn't transferable. You can't just hand someone a manual and expect 20 years of relationship building to transfer over. These people knew my voice, had my personal cell number for emergencies, trusted my judgment after years of midnight crisis calls. Within hours, the dominoes started falling. Colonel Foster at North Point Defense Solutions sent an automated response to Sentinel Guard's team. Original architect verification required. Contract suspended, pending authentication. St. Mary's Hospital System in Dallas couldn't validate their security protocols. Texas Power and Light needed my personal sign-off for grid protection updates. One by one, the partners I'd worked with for decades were asking the same question. Where's Gordon Palmer? My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Former colleagues confused and panicked. Gordy, they're saying half our contracts are frozen. Brian doesn't know the verification codes. Stephanie's calling emergency meetings every hour. I have to admit, I felt pretty good, watching it unfold. Not mean-spirited, more like watching the laws of physics work exactly as expected. You can't just remove the keystone from an arch and expect everything to hold together. See, Brian might have had my badge and my office, but he didn't have my relationships. When some kid these people had never heard of tried to authorize critical security updates, they did exactly what I'd trained them to do. They said no. Stephanie tried to fix it the MBA way with meetings and presentations. Brian put together a slick slideshow about next-generation security paradigms and AI-driven zero-trust architectures. Pure buzzword soup that sounded impressive but meant nothing to people who actually had to keep systems running. The partners listened politely, then asked to speak with Gordon Palmer. By day 5, the situation was getting serious. That's when Stephanie made her first real mistake trying to fix her original mistake. She had Brian post on LinkedIn about revolutionizing cybersecurity with blockchain-integrated solutions. The post went viral in our industry, and not in a good way. Comments ranged from professional skepticism to outright mockery. Who is this kid? Sentinel Guard fired Gordon Palmer for this? 26 years of experience replaced by buzzwords. Jerry Patterson, who ran IT procurement for the Texas Hospital Consortium, called me that evening. We'd worked together since 2011, had been through 4 major cyber attacks and countless midnight emergencies. Gordy, what the hell is going on over there? This Brian kid doesn't know a firewall from a screen door. Our board is asking questions. They wanted fresh blood, Jerry. Apparently I was too set in my ways. Jerry snorted. Set in your ways? You mean competent? Listen, when you're ready to start your own shop, give me a call. The hospital consortium would love to work with you directly. That conversation planted a seed. For 26 years, I'd been loyal to Sentinel Guard, even when headhunters called offering double my salary. But loyalty has to go both ways, doesn't it? The real crisis hit on day 7. Brian, desperate to prove himself, authorized a major security update across the Texas hospital network without proper testing. The update had a bug, a rookie mistake that any experienced engineer would have caught in quality assurance. Suddenly, electronic health records were inaccessible at 47 hospitals across Texas and Oklahoma. Patient care wasn't immediately compromised. The systems failed safe like I'd designed them to, but diagnostic equipment went offline, surgery schedules got disrupted, and emergency rooms had to switch to paper records. The story made national news within hours. Cybersecurity firms botched update cripples hospital network. CNN ran interviews with frustrated doctors and nurses. One ER doctor from Dallas Presbyterian looked straight into the camera and said, "This never happened when Gordon Palmer was running security. Never." The hospital administrators I'd worked with for decades were furious, not just at the outage, but at the incompetence behind it. These were people who trusted me to keep their patients safe, and now they were dealing with the consequences of replacing experience with buzzwords. My phone exploded with calls from reporters wanting comment. I stayed professional, declining interviews, but the industry trade publications got the story anyway. Former colleagues speaking anonymously painted a clear picture. Experienced architect fired for inexperienced family member. Predictable disaster follows. That evening, my son Tommy called. He's 31 now, Army veteran like his old man, works as a project manager for a construction company. Dad, I saw the news about Sentinel Guard. Are you okay? I'm fine, son. Actually, I'm thinking this might be the best thing that ever happened to me. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time I stopped building other people's empires and started building my own. Tommy was quiet for a moment. Dad, you know I've got some savings. If you want to start a company, consider it an investment in someone I believe in. That meant more than any contract, any salary, any recognition I'd ever received. My boy had faith in me, even when my own company didn't. The next morning I called Jerry back. That offer you mentioned? I'm interested. 2 weeks after the hospital network disaster, I was sitting in a lawyer's office downtown reviewing documents that would change everything. My attorney, Charles Webb, had been going through the patent agreements with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. Gordy, this is remarkable, he said, looking up from the stack of papers. These 42 patents aren't just valuable, they're foundational to every major contract Sentinel Guard holds. The licensing agreements are ironclad. When they terminated you without cause, they triggered the reversion clause. Meaning what exactly? Meaning you now own free and clear intellectual property worth $1.1 billion. Every security protocol, every encryption algorithm, every intrusion detection system, it's all yours. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. 26 years of late nights, missed family dinners, and sacrificed weekends had just become my ticket to independence. What's Sentinel Guard's legal position? Charles shook his head. They don't have one. Their own board signed these agreements in 2019 during that massive cyber attack. They were desperate to keep you from jumping to a competitor, so they agreed to these terms without reading the fine print. That afternoon, I had lunch with Jerry at our usual spot, Murphy's Tavern on South Lamar. The place was packed with tech workers grabbing quick meals, but our corner booth felt private enough for serious conversation. So, it's really happening? Jerry asked after I explained the legal situation. Palmer Security Solutions is officially incorporated as of yesterday. I've got the patents, I've got the relationships, and thanks to my son's investment, I've got startup capital. Jerry grinned and raised his bourbon. To the dumbest CEO decision in Austin tech history. We clinked glasses, but I wasn't feeling celebratory yet. Jerry, I need to ask you something serious. The hospital consortium, would they really work with a one-man operation? Gordy, let me tell you something. After Brian's disaster last week, our board held an emergency meeting. They voted unanimously to terminate the Sentinel Guard contract. We were just waiting for an alternative. What about liability, insurance, all the corporate safeguards? We've been working with you for 13 years. You think we care more about corporate letterhead than actual competence? Besides, half the hospitals in Texas are small operations themselves. They understand that the best expertise doesn't always come from the biggest companies. Over the next month, word spread through the industry like wildfire. Gordon Palmer was back in business, and he owned the technology that half of Austin's tech sector depended on. The first official contract came from Colonel Foster at North Point Defense Solutions. She called personally. Gordy, we need to talk. Our Pentagon contracts require the security protocols you developed. With you gone from Sentinel Guard, we're in violation of federal compliance standards. I'm not gone, Janet. I'm just independent now. Thank God. Can you be in Virginia Beach next week? We need to restructure our entire agreement. The meeting at North Point was like a reunion. Janet introduced me to 3 other defense contractors who'd been struggling with the same compliance issues. By the end of the week, I had $280 million in signed contracts. Word got back to Sentinel Guard fast. Stephanie called my cell phone directly, a number she'd never bothered to save in 26 years of working together. Gordy, we need to discuss this situation. You're poaching our clients. I'm not poaching anything, Stephanie. These are relationships I built over decades. They're choosing to work with me because they trust my expertise. This is corporate theft. I'll sue you into bankruptcy. I kept my voice calm. Go ahead. Your own legal team will explain why that's not going to work. You fired the guy who owned the technology. Actions have consequences. She hung up without another word. The industry trades picked up the story within days. Veteran security architect strikes gold after controversial firing. The article detailed how Sentinel Guard had lost $450 million in contracts in 8 weeks, while my new firm was signing deals with major defense contractors and hospital systems. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Senator Maria Rodriguez, chair of the Senate Cybersecurity Subcommittee, called personally. Mr. Palmer, I've been following your story with great interest. We're holding hearings on critical infrastructure protection next month. Would you be willing to testify as an expert witness? I'd be honored, Senator. Good. We need people with your experience helping us understand these threats. The recent hospital network failure has raised serious questions about private sector cybersecurity standards. You gotta love the irony. Brian's incompetence had created a national security discussion, and I was being called to Washington to help fix the problems his generation had created. Meanwhile, Sentinel Guard was imploding. Brian had made 4 more major mistakes, including a failed update that knocked out traffic management systems in downtown Austin for 8 hours. Stephanie was calling emergency board meetings weekly, trying to explain how she'd managed to lose both her chief architect and $450 million in contracts in 2 months. The tech blogs were brutal. How Sentinel Guard's CEO destroyed a billion-dollar company in 60 days. The article quoted anonymous employees describing a toxic environment where experience was dismissed and nepotism rewarded incompetence. My daughter Lisa visited that weekend, bringing my 2 grandsons to see my new office space. It wasn't much, 2,000 square feet in a converted warehouse, but it was mine. The boys, 6 and 4 years old, were fascinated by all the computer equipment. Dad, I have to ask, Lisa said, while the boys played with some old keyboards I kept around. Are you bitter about what they did? I thought about that for a moment, watching my 6-year-old grandson trying to figure out how a mouse worked. No, sweetheart, I'm grateful. Stephanie and Brian taught me something valuable, that 26 years of loyalty and expertise can't be replaced by family connections and buzzwords. They showed me I was worth more than they ever realized. Lisa smiled. So what's next? Next, we build something that matters, something that protects people without betraying the folks who make it possible. 8 months after walking out of Sentinel Guard with nothing but a cardboard box, I was sitting in a Senate hearing room in Washington, D.C., preparing to testify before the Cybersecurity Subcommittee. The nameplate in front of me read, Gordon Palmer, CEO, Palmer Security Solutions. Senator Rodriguez had done her homework. Her opening statement detailed how critical infrastructure failures had increased 300% in the past year, with most incidents traced back to inadequate security protocols and inexperienced management. Mr. Palmer, she said, you've been protecting America's critical systems for 26 years. In your expert opinion, what's causing this dramatic increase in failures? I leaned into the microphone. Senator, it's simple. Companies are prioritizing cost-cutting and nepotism over competence. They're firing experienced professionals and replacing them with cheaper, less qualified alternatives. The recent hospital network failure in Texas is a perfect example. The cameras captured every word. Brian's LinkedIn posts about revolutionizing cybersecurity were projected on screens behind me as I explained in technical detail exactly how his incompetence had endangered patient lives. When you replace 26 years of experience with someone who's never handled a real crisis, I continued, you're not just risking money, you're risking lives. Every dialysis machine, every power grid, every emergency room system depends on people who understand that there's no such thing as acceptable downtime. That testimony made national news. Veteran cybersecurity expert exposes industry crisis. The story went beyond tech circles. It was about American workers being discarded for cheaper alternatives, about experience being devalued in favor of buzzwords and connections. The response was immediate. 3 Fortune 500 companies called that week wanting to audit their cybersecurity leadership. The Department of Homeland Security offered a consulting contract to review federal infrastructure standards. My small warehouse office suddenly felt very cramped. Meanwhile, Sentinel Guard was in freefall. The board finally acted 3 weeks after my Senate testimony, firing Stephanie in a closed-door meeting that leaked to the press within hours. The industry blogs were merciless. Board dumps CEO who destroyed billion-dollar company. Brian disappeared from LinkedIn entirely after his post became a case study in corporate incompetence. Last I heard, he was working at a startup that made apps for dog walkers. But the real satisfaction came from an unexpected source. Stephanie showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon, looking tired and desperate. My receptionist, I actually had a receptionist now, buzzed me. Mr. Palmer, there's a Stephanie Morrison here to see you. She says it's urgent. I almost said no. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. She walked into my office like a different person. The corporate confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. Gordy, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit down, Stephanie. I want to offer you a partnership. Equal equity, complete control of technical operations. Name your terms. I studied her face. Why? Because I destroyed everything we built. The board fired me, but they're willing to bring me back if I can fix this. You're the only one who can save the company. Stephanie, you didn't just fire me. You fired 26 years of relationships, trust, and expertise. You can't buy that back. Gordy, please, I have a family, a mortgage. I'm 48 years old. Who's going to hire me after this disaster? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered that conference room, Brian's smirk. The dismissive way she'd slid those termination papers across the table. You should have thought about that before you decided experience didn't matter. She left without another word. 2 months later, Sentinel Guard filed for bankruptcy. The company that had been worth $2.8 billion when I walked out the door was sold for parts, with most of their remaining contracts transferring to competitors, including several that came to me. Palmer Security Solutions now employs 47 people, including 5 veterans from my old Army unit and 8 engineers who quit Sentinel Guard after my firing. We work reasonable hours, respect each other's expertise, and nobody gets fired for being too experienced. I hired Tommy as our operations manager. Turns out his construction project management skills translate perfectly to coordinating security implementations. Lisa brings the grandsons by the office every Friday afternoon, and I make sure to leave early on weekends. Last weekend, I took those boys fishing at Lake Travis, taught them how to bait hooks and be patient. We didn't catch much, but we had time. Something I'd forgotten was valuable. The 6-year-old asked me, "Grandpa, why did your old boss fire you?" Because she forgot that experience matters, buddy. She thought new was automatically better than proven. That's dumb. Yeah, it was. But sometimes when people make dumb decisions, it works out better for everyone else. He nodded seriously, then went back to watching his bobber. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's proving you were worth more than they ever realized. It's building something better, something that honors the people who make it possible. Stephanie made one critical error. She forgot that in technology, as in life, you can't replace the foundation without bringing down the whole structure. 26 years of expertise isn't just a resume line. It's the bedrock everything else stands on. I learned something too. Loyalty has to be earned, not just given. And sometimes getting fired is the best thing that can happen to you. The grandsons are already asking when we can go fishing again.